Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the story presented in an Al Jazeera documentary that looks at the September 11th attacks. We're going to follow the evidence laid out in that film to explore how the plot came together and, crucially, why so many warnings seem to have been missed. It all really comes down to this one big question, right? And the source material explores this by telling two stories that are happening at the exact same time. On one side, you've got the careful, patient planning of a handful of operatives, and on the other, a series of missed signals inside the most powerful intelligence network on the planet. So, to really get a grip on how this happened, we have to look at these two paths. They started years before, thousands of miles apart, but they were on a collision course, set to meet in the most tragic way possible on a Tuesday morning in September. All right, so our first path starts in Hamburg, Germany. According to the film, this is where a group of radicalized students started coming together to form a tight-knit cell. And you can see on the timeline, this wasn't an overnight thing. Their commitment grew over years. I mean, Mohammed Atta signed a will to die way back in '96, and a few years later, he's off to Afghanistan to train with Al-Qaeda. Okay, so just as this Hamburg cell is getting its big mission, our second path starts to take shape. It's early 2001, and over in the United States, there's a huge political shift happening. A brand new administration is moving into the White House, and they've got their own ideas about what America's priorities should be on the world stage. So, what were those priorities? Well, the documentary points out that the new administration was focused on what you might call traditional threats, big stuff, nation states. They were thinking about missile defense, dealing with major powers like China and Russia, and of course, keeping a very close eye on Iraq. This new kind of threat from a group like Al-Qaeda, well, it just wasn't top of mind. Let's jump back to Hamburg for a second and take a closer look at how this group of students really became the core team for the 9/11 plot. This place, Marienstrasse 54, was so much more than just an apartment. The source actually calls it the kitchen. And that's because this is where the plot was cooked up. It's where their ideas got harder, their plans got clearer, and their total commitment to the mission was sealed. Now, this is a really fascinating perspective, coming straight from the guy who masterminded the whole thing, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He said that their biggest problem wasn't finding guys willing to die. It was the opposite. They had a surplus. The real trick was figuring out how to aim all that energy at the targets that would have the biggest possible impact. So, the plan gets the green light, the team is picked, and the next phase kicks off. It's time to get the operatives inside the United States itself. And get this, they didn't sneak around in the shadows. They walked right into commercial flight schools, mostly down in Florida, and signed up for lessons. They were learning to fly the exact kind of planes they wanted to use as weapons. They were literally hiding in plain sight, carrying out the most important part of their mission. And this was not a low-budget operation. The source material shows there were some pretty big wire transfers, over $100,000 in just one chunk. All that cash coming from the UAE meant they could live and train for more than a year without ever having to worry about money. And this is one of the most unbelievable details the documentary brings up. Two of the key hijackers weren't just in the US, they were living in San Diego, and their roommate was a guy who was actively working as a long-term FBI informant. You just can't make this stuff up. So while all this is happening, let's switch over to the other side of the story. Because as the plotters are getting into position, alarms are starting to go off inside the US government. The documentary shows there were some serious red flags. Check this out. On July 10th, 2001, just 2 months before the attacks, an FBI agent in Phoenix sends a memo up the ladder. He spotted a really weird pattern. A bunch of guys from the Middle East all trying to get into US flight schools. He was basically laying out the entire 9/11 plot right there in a memo. And the key here is that this wasn't some vague hunch. The memo connected the dots. It explicitly names Osama bin Laden as the guy who was probably behind this whole coordinated push to get pilots trained in America. So what happened to this bombshell memo? Well, according to the source, it just got stuck. It died somewhere in middle management. For all its chilling accuracy, the warning never made it to the top brass at FBI headquarters in Washington. The alarm bell was ringing, but nobody in charge heard it. But that wasn't the only alarm, not by a long shot. Just 5 weeks before the attacks, the president gets his top-secret intelligence report for the day. And the title on August 6th was about as blunt as it gets. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a clear-as-day headline warning that an attack inside the U.S. was in the works. So you get to the last few weeks of summer in 2001, and you can just feel these two paths hurtling towards each other. You've got the plotters making their final, critical moves, and you've got the intelligence agencies with their last, desperate chances to stop them. It's a collision course. And this slide just lays it all out, side by side, in that final month. On the left, it's all action and purpose. The data's set in code, the final team members arrive, the targets are locked in. But on the right, it's a story of missed opportunities. An operative gets arrested, but the FBI isn't allowed to search his laptop. A key hijacker finally gets put on a watch list, but he's already back in the country. It's a story of action versus inaction. Okay, so after laying out this whole timeline, the documentary kind of pivots. It moves on from what happened and starts asking these really provocative, tough questions that, it argues, still haven't really been answered. And this is the central mystery the film leaves you with. It asks you to consider whether all of these failures, one after another, were just a case of unbelievable, catastrophic incompetence, or if maybe, just maybe, there was another reason why so many warnings were ignored. To even ask that question, the film brings up something from the history books, Operation Northwoods. This was a real, declassified proposal from 1962. The plan was for the U.S. military to stage fake terrorist attacks on American soil, blame it all on Cuba, and use that as the reason to invade. The film also puts this quote on the table, from a book written in 1997 by a former national security advisor. And it's presented as evidence that some very powerful people were already thinking that the U.S. would need some kind of new Pearl Harbor to get the American public on board for major military campaigns in the Middle East. And that all leads to this final, really pointed question the documentary raises. It points out that on the very day of the attacks, some top officials were already trying to connect it to Iraq. So the film asks, if all the evidence pointed to al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, why did the strategic conversation shift so fast to a country that had nothing to do with it? That's